Hello, all of my beautiful pet parents. My name is Angie Hartzell. I am a behavioral dog trainer, connection specialist for dogs and women, and I am an animal communicator, pet psychic, and medium. And I am so glad that you are here today because we are talking about boundaries with your dog. And the dog who literally needs to kind of just stop doing what they're doing in their brain and start getting into their body so they can start to feel safe and we can get some of that barking to calm down. So let's talk about that today. I want to share a really quick story with you about a client of mine who was in a really new predicament, a very stressful predicament, and a moment where she was so frustrated with her dog that she didn't know how to stop the dog's reaction at the door, where people would come in and the dog would bark incredibly loud when someone was approaching the door. And then when the people would come in, the dog would feel like it was just out of control, needing to jump on them, bark at them, circle them, and just be really, really, really in the face of the person that came in the door. This person that I helped, my client, she is handicapped. She uses a cane in the home or a walker, and she has a mobile scooter that she gets in to take the dog outside. So whenever someone would come to the door, she would feel really overwhelmed with the dog jumping up, barking, circling the person, just being too much for the person to get in the door. And on top of it all, she lived in an apartment building. She lives in an apartment building. And that made it really hard for my client to feel like she was in control of the dog, not only because of all of the barking and everything that went on, but she could not physically get to the dog. She couldn't get to her dog in time for the dog to calm down enough to let anyone in the door. What would end up happening is that by the time that she could physically get to the door, the dog was so involved at the door that they could barely get the person in the door that was coming through. So let's talk about boundaries for your dog. Now, normally when I train a dog that is barking at the door, we use a lot of body blocking. Body blocking is when you use various parts of your body to get in front of the dog so the dog doesn't have the opportunity to touch the door or touch the person, right? So we use a lot of body blocking. But in this case, my client was handicapped. She was unstable on her feet and just kind of wasn't feeling safe, approaching the dog and getting in front of the dog in any way. And we also know that she also walked with a walker or a cane at all times. So now you're talking about a device and all of these things. Now, as much as the dog was very comfortable with all of the devices used in the home, the dog was still in fear state when someone would come to the door. So when we create a boundary, I always like to work with clients one-on-one so they can see what it is that is kind of like the threshold, I guess you'd say, of where they want the dog to be when there's a door situation or a doorway situation or a certain person in the home or a cat or a dog or anything in the home that the dog that we're working with wants to get to immediately. We want to look at that threshold, right? And that's a boundary. So in this situation, we created a threshold that was about 6 feet back from the door. Excuse me, I'm saying 6 feet because when she uses her scooter, the scooter sat about 6 feet from the door. So we use the front of the scooter as like the visual threshold that we asked the dog to sit at. And you're going to laugh, but you have to get creative when training dogs when there are people that are not able to do the exact thing that's needed to stop the behavior the fastest. And you need to bring tools into play. So the thing that we used in this case was a hot pad. And I know that sounds crazy, but the day that I was there, she was trying her hardest to just kind of put her cane in front of the dog to get the dog to stay back at the threshold mark when we were training this. When you're actively training, the dog will continue to go to the door. So we have to pull the dog back and we have to usually body block and walk the dog back. But in this case, we were using a tool. Now, whenever you use a tool, the number one thing you need to keep in mind is you never come from above, okay? We never want to use a tool that comes from above the dog, okay, or straight at its face. Anything coming in from like shoulders up, that is a no-no zone. That is danger zone for the dog. That is total fear creation zone. And we don't want to do that when we're using tools. Now, in this case, we used a hot pad. Why did we use a hot pad? Because she was using her cane. And what we were noticing is even though she would put the cane in front of the dog, which I'm going to talk exactly about the safe way to do this in a second, but she would put the cane in front of the dog would go under the cane, right? Because it's an extension of her arm and her body wasn't close enough to the dog for him to feel like he needed to listen to her, kind of. She was using it as an extension and we were doing the best that we could. And there was a hot pad laying on her counter. And I said, you know what? I have an idea. Let's try it. So what we did was we grabbed the hot pad, which she now keeps near the door, which is absolutely beautiful in my eyes. You know, we found a way around her extending her arm with the cane. So she grabs the hot pad, right? And she keeps it by the door. And all she does is she comes at the dog at chest level. Okay. So all we asked of her in that moment was to bend down a little teeny bit. It's not even a full bend that we did with her. It's just a little bit. She puts the hot pad in front of the chest of the dog and she uses that. So her arm is there, her body is right next to the arm, and she uses that tool, the hot pad, to push the dog back to the threshold line, which is the front of the scooter, which is about 6 feet from the door. And now we have a successful routine and a tool that she can grab at when she's home alone, which is almost all of the time. We literally use that hot pad to show him in his brain that we need to take a moment and get him out of his scattered, kind of staticky brain where he's going at the door, going at the door, going at the door because he's in control of the situation. And that grabbing of the hot pad just allows him to see that she is still in control of that situation. She is still in control of her front door. He's not able to take control of that front door. So what happened was I went back about a week later. It was actually about a week and a half later. And she's an elderly woman and she actually doesn't text or anything. So I didn't hear from her. And when I went back, she was the happiest woman. The constant barking stopped. Because what happened is when she would go and rest in her chair, what she would do is she would take the hot pad with her. And if someone would come to the door, she'd grab the hot pad with her cane. So now she's creating a boundary that's moving with her. And see, our own bodies and our hands and every part of who we are is still us. Like it's still us. We can't change that we are us, right? And the dog knows us as their companion and their mentor and the one that loves them and cares for them. But when you insert a tool, in this case the hot pad, an object, the brain takes a moment and says, wait a second, what's happening? Why does she have the hot pad? Right? And all you need is that moment to get into mentor mindset with the dog and put the dog in what's known as follower mindset. And when you do this, this allows the dog to shut off the brain first reaction and get into follower mindset, which is they're listening to your lead. So now she grabs the hot pad, she grabs her cane, and she walks to the door. Because she has the hot pad in her door, even though he may scurry in front of her and bark a little bit, she said the barking went down like over 80%. He still does a little bit of barking, but because she has the hot pad, he's hesitant. Well, I saw her again. It was a couple weeks later, about 2 weeks later, I'd say. I only kept seeing her because I was a delivery driver for a pharmacy. And she was not my client to begin with, but the first day that I went there, I helped her with her dog, and then she became my client. So I was delivering with the pharmacy and I had to deliver her medicines. And when I did this, I noticed that I knocked on her door and I heard the dog on the other side of the door. He was breathing. He was right at that door sniffing. He was there, but he was not barking. And she told me, she said that hot pad being used as the tool saved their relationship. She was getting complaints by multiple neighbors that the dog was barking too much because she's a very active woman in the apartment building that she lives in. She's an active woman, so she goes to different meetings and she's always coming and going, right? And she's on committees and things like that. So there's always people in and out. And she was really afraid that she was not going to be able to keep this dog. And she had just rescued this dog. This was a fresh rescue, I think 2 months in her home. So she was really looking for a way to keep this dog. And it literally came down to a hot pad. But remember, here's the rules when you're using a tool. Never ever come from over the head. Never ever come in right in front of the face, and never ever come above the shoulders with any type of tool. You're going to use the tool to push the dog back. We never swat the tool. We never like pick it up and shake it. We just use the tool as our arm and our hand would to push the dog back. But again, sometimes if we try to do this with just our body, there are dogs out there whose brains are just way more interested in being in control in that moment, and they don't follow the rule of just being a body part that you need to push the dog back, because she was not able to physically put her entire body in front of the dog and position herself as a new barrier, a new boundary. We use the hot pad to do this for us. This was a smaller dog. I'm going to say about 20 to 30, no, I'm sorry, 25 to 35 pounds. That's about right. He had taller legs, but he's a smaller dog. And so he stood tall enough, like I'd say probably a little bit taller than a beagle. He stood about that tall. He was a mix, this dog. But she was able to just slightly bend down and get that hot pad in front of the chest. And I told her the top of that hot pad cannot go above his chin or we're in fear zone. We need to stay from here down. And that's exactly what she did. And it worked so beautifully. And it's small changes like this that when you're living in the stress and you're living in the anxiety, you don't understand that you do have leverage to get your dog to listen easier and want to be in follower mindset, because you're living in the mix of it and you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. But the truth is, you always have an ability to get your dog into follower mindset and you in mentor mindset when you stand your ground as a boundary. In this case, we needed a tool with our boundary to create the threshold that we were looking for. But it worked beautifully. So be safe if you use tools. If you have any questions at all, my email is open 24/7, info@petparentconnection.com. Reach out to me, ask me. I'll help you the best that I can. If you want some video training, it's right on my website. Drop me a couple videos. I'll do some back and forth with you and we'll communicate, maybe even hop on a call if we have to, and I will help you. So I wish you so much luck as you're training your dog. I think that boundaries and using tools are just great ways to get our dog into a safer, calmer space quicker. And it works beautifully for both parties. So I can't thank you enough for choosing you and your dog today. If you have any questions about anything that I offer, go to petparentconnection.com. And if you haven't checked out my new ebook yet, that's on my website. And I can't thank you enough, and have a beautiful day. Bye bye.